Welcome back to Sipa's Pimmer Garage. This time we continue with this E81 project from what we were left last time, which is the engine wiring harness. If you haven't watched the previous video, I recommend watching that first. But here I have upcoming spare engine for the car, which I will make video about later. It's handy to have this on engine stand, because I can easily create the wiring harness using this as a guide. I even have the simulated ECU box here and everything. This is of course dual one-nose engine and not the old M50 guards engine, but in this case it doesn't matter. I will make this wiring harness so that it fits both the M50 and this kind of M54 too. The extra connectors just aren't plugged in the M50. But yeah, let's start by making the coil harness and then the rest. I'm using Radiator DR25 heatshrink tubing here, because it's the best thing that you can get. If you try that once, you really cannot use anything else after that. On the splits, I have used Kapton tape to protect the heatshrink tubing with adhesive from sticking to the wires. And I should really use the Radiator SCL here, but the assortment kits weren't available at the moment, so I just used some cheap one. Once the coil harness is done, let's move forwards. Here I'm splitting the harness for injectors and for the other stuff that is in the same direction. Then another bundle is for the sensors on their intake, and then for the O2 sensor, starter and such things. I'm using small chip tie to support the split. And here I'm making the O2 sensor connector. But hey, this is pretty boring, so let's jump to the garage at this point, because Petri has been there mounting the charge cooler and radiator to the front of the car. That charge cooler is one that was left over from my E30 when I installed the S58 intake to it. So we will now reuse that in this project. That full aluminum radiator is something that Petri ordered for the one. But it was the wrong size for that, so we will use that for this project instead. I think that was the basic E36 model. That electric fan is the car's original one. It's quite powerful 600 or 800 watt one, depending on the model. And it's PWM controlled, which can be easily done with the Primus ECU. Top side of the radiator is mounted with that kind of small steel pieces. But yeah, that came out nicely like that, and we can continue with the wiring harness. So let's put the wiring harness on the car and finish it up on there, because I didn't manage to do that on my home garage. These injector wires are easy because they only have grounding control wire from ECU and power wire from DME relay. These rest of the wires are for the vanos solenoids, cam sensors and the boost solenoid wires. You don't really need to twist these as I did, but that makes the wires more flexible. You might have already noticed the turbo behind there while I was working on the wiring harness. So let's check that out, because making this wiring harness is still quite boring. Then the turbo. This here is GTX 3071R, dual ball bearing turbo. Or well, GTX 3071R, because this is a Chinese copy of one. No one has enough money to put real carret to drift missile. But anyways, this is from eBay seller that at least here in Finland, people seem to have very positive experience of the turbos from that seller. But also the feedback on eBay is positive and there is a lot of those. And those feedbacks seem to be real and no bot ones. So this should be quite capable thingy. In my books, this is quite small turbo. This is, well, at least the real version from Garrett is advertised to flow up to 550 HP. But I don't know if this Chinese knockoff is as good as the real ones. But they seem to replicate these quite well, so it could be true for this too. But well, anyways, I have done some on the back of the cigarette case calculations, and this should be pretty much perfect for the 4 to 500 HP on 2.5 liter engine. This also have air 0.83 exhaust housing, which also should be pretty good compromise for this to flow well and not to choke up immediately, but also should be pretty good at waking up. Something like 0.63 will easily choke up on the top end, even though it will wake up better. Then something like 1.0 AR tends to be a bit too big and well flowing for this size engine. Of course for bigger like V8 that might be okay, but for 2.5 liter engine this should be okay. At least what I calculated quickly. This also isn't that expensive either, and we did actually sell the original engine and other parts. And we got something like 950 euros from those. So that car there actually cost only 50 euros for us, if you want to think it in that way. But anyways, we used that money to buy this turbo. And there was some money left from that, which we will most likely spend for angle kit or something like that. But anyways, this is the one that we will install to the car. This has this pathetic 2-inch outlet, so that needs adapter or something. Petri will most likely do the charge piping for this. And then I was looking at the oiling and water cooling side for this. So about that. As you have seen earlier, this engine will have the Vanos. This is some Vanos oil line that I did find. This at least looks like this hasn't been leaking, so this should be fine. And this will go to the engine using these benzo bolts. Then after digging through the stash, we did find this turbo oil line. This is custom made at Kailatech if I remember correctly. This is a Teflon hose with bunch of fittings at the ends. And this works so that this end will go to the same spot as this Vanos oil line is. So this will go with this end. Fuck. This is difficult to get there. And then this will have double benzo bolt like this. So like this we can get the oil flowing to the turbo. So, because we are using as much of the parts we have on the garage, we will use these for the turbo. Cause has small difficulty with this carret. The oil feed in this has some ridiculous 7/16 24 UNF thread, or what the hell was that? These are meant to have that kind of longish adapter with conical thread or something. And then the other end of the adapter is AN3. So you can put AN hose there. You could of course replace this end with GIC fitting that would go onto that directly. But I thought that it would be easiest if I can manage to find a puncher bolt that fits this. And Tarvikemotti actually had suitable puncher bolt for this. This should have the correct 7/16 24 UNF thread. This threads nicely to here. This bolt is something like 11.2 mm and this puncher bolt is M12. But I think this will work fine with suitable copper cross washer, even though this is a bit small. This also doesn't go all the way in. You can see that there's some conical thing at the bottom. I don't know what that is, so I need to drill this so that this will go all the way in. But even that isn't enough. At least on the correct instructions, it says that there needs to be oil restrictor. And it needed to be something stupid like 0.000 inches or something like that. So I also need to weld this shut and then drill 1 mm hole to this to make this actually work for this setup. But yeah, everything else we had. I just needed to buy this €5 bunch of fitting to make this work. But that should be enough. Then of course there is the water cooling, which is weird because this is UNF and these are M12. But after digging through the boxes, I did find more of these bunch of bolts, so those will go there. Then of course we need some fittings for the water cooling. There was some bunch of fittings like these, but it looks like those won't work. They will hit almost everything here. But then I did find this. This is some aftermarket oil line for the Vanos. But this is just a big joke. Like look at these crimps at the ends. These aren't even close to being at the correct spot, and this is just all wrinkles and shit. Even the hose is just a joke. I think this is just some gardening hose or something. So for some reason I haven't used this. But I was wondering that if I will just cut these shitty crimps away from this, and I will get these kind of longer bunch of fittings from this. Or I don't know. If I will put this here like this, and then the other so that it will go over the top of this. And that might work out. So yeah, let's cut this so that we can get the waterline fittings from this, and then try this on the car. Then of course the turbo also needs oil return, and Petri had bought some A1 fittings and hose and other bits and pieces for it. But the exhaust manifold was bit on the way for that turbo side flange, so we needed to get creative with that. Niin.
Perkeleen.
Joo.
Tänne ei voi valua yhtään.
On selvästi tässä kumminkin näkyy.
Eipä sitä paljon tarvitse.
Joo, aika hyvin sinne osoittaa. Merkki sinne.
Se on vaan saa olla sitten kerralla kohdillaan, kun ei joku yksi semmonen.
Yeah, that kind of oil return for the turbo. Should we now continue again with the wiring harness? Okay, the top side of the harness starts to be ready. The coil harness is done, then the O2 sensor connector is here. The sensor will go there on the downpipe and then connects to here. Injector wires are there. Everything is labeled so that you know where those connect. Manas connector is here. Cam sensor connector. Then there is a few wires towards here, to the exhaust funnels and then to the exhaust cam sensor and boost solenoid. But as you can see, this engine doesn't have the exhaust side funnels unit. These are just here for the spare engine. I did put all the connectors it needs here to this harness, so the engine can be easily swapped. In practice, I will just coil up those extra wires and hide those under the intake in this engine. But let's now pull out the intake and then do the other side here. The amount of wires might look quite big here, but like half of these won't be used at all. I will just terminate these somewhere here. In reality, there is only few sensors, like coolant temp sensor, intake air temp sensor, throttle body, and crank angle sensor. Those at least. And there will be oil pressure and temp sensor. And then fuel pressure sensor, which would have been much better to be on this side of harness. But yeah, that will then go a bit across the whole thing. Well, it is what it is. Let's take an intake off and finish that. We start to be at home stretch. So, here is now the wires for the sensors, throttle body, flex fuel sensor and so on. Those are now separated to own branches. Then these are the wires that won't be used. These are either knock inputs or high side outputs. Those aren't used in this, so that's why I have terminated the wires. Then these two coaxial wires are for the VR inputs. This is VR1 and this here is VR2. The Rafa from RM Motors told me, or what was even the correct name. Anyways, he told me that the VR2 minus also works as a Hull input. So I will connect the Sherry Hull sensor to this. And I will use this VR2 minus input as the ground sensor input. Mainly because this has the EMI shielding. So that's why I chose this. And then here is also plus 5 volts and ground for the sensor. So these are for the crank angle sensor. So this is now ready to be finalized with the heat shrink. I will leave all these extra wires here, so if I ever need those, I don't need to redo the whole harness. Then here I have the ignition power to wake up the alternator. This car doesn't have the bulb in the cluster, so it doesn't work with the alternators like this. But as far as I know, it should be enough that there's 12 volts for the alternator when ignition is on. So that's this wire for. So let's put these together. This wire for the alternator and then put heat shrink on and this should be done. Okay, here's the finished wiring harness. Or well, to be honest, it's missing a few connectors. Here should be flex fuel connector, and here should be an exhaust cam sensor connector. But neither of those are needed now, so I can put those on later, when the wiring is in the car. For the exhaust cam, I had the wrong connector, and for the flex fuel sensor, I had 3 different connectors. But I forgot to take the sensor here with me now, so I don't know which is the correct one. So I didn't put anything here. But there it is now, and we can start putting that on the car and start checking that everything works. First, of course, that the ECU wakes up. If that looks okay, we can start plugging stuff and make sure that everything works. I want to show that I will plug in everything at once and then hope for the best that everything is okay and nothing catches on fire. I'll plug in things one by one to avoid damaging anything. I have tried to be very careful with everything to be sure that things are wired incorrectly. But I still tend to make mistakes, so just in case. But there's one thing that was unclear last time. This ECU doesn't, or well, none of the aftermarket ECUs control the DME relay as the BMW does. But in practice, here's the white wire with the blue stripe. When you ground this, the DME relay activates. And then the coils and everything in the engine will get powered on. So this needs to be grounded when ignition is on. But then, here's the white connector that has the VUP wire. Wake up. So when you power on the car, or well, push the start button to turn on ignition, the stock ECU activates the DME relay based on that. So here I have now same circuit that I have on my M50 and F52 Speeduinos. So I have here 2 and 222, what the hell, what was it, even that transistor. So that will ground the DME relay control wire when there's a power in the VUP wire. So basically the car now directly controls the power to the ECU and the engine. The ECU doesn't decide that. That should work and be OK for now. So that kind of small packet, and let's hope it's okay. Yeah, and to be able to plug everything in, we need the intake manifold on. So first we need to put on all the missing water hoses. And then I noticed that we are also missing the main power cables. We can use the car's original cable to the starter, but I need to make suitable one from the starter to the alternator. Ei, EC, mikä se on?
EC.
Niin. Euroopan kontinentti. Siihen piti vähän Kyllä sieltä tulee. Kyllä sieltä sen verran tulee.
Tahtopaineet kyllä hyvin luomaan.
You probably already heard the AC tick sound on the background. That's because Petri has been hard at work making charge piping for this. Partly from old discarded parts at the garage, but we also had to get some new parts. But if you see some interesting choices on those, it's because of the old, not so suitable parts we had. Aika valaavasti. Hei, ainakaan heilulta pahalla puolella. Joo.
Onko tässä jälkipolti ollut tuolla näkee? Oli muuten ihan hyvät hajut.
Joo. Yeah, that kind of things. But yeah, that intake manifold install is still not done. It needs some modification to be done before going in. First we installed the M52 open style intake air temp sensor to it. And it needed the hole to be drilled bigger besides what you can see on the video. And for the old intake air temp sensor hole, we did put map sensor hose connector using adapter. And then it's time to do the adapter for the B58 throttle body.
Ottaa kamera kohta. Mitä löytöjä täällä? Tiedätkö mitä täällä on yksi esimerkki löytö?
No.
Mitä vittua?
No.
Tiedätkö mitä ne on?
No varmaan dieselin suuttimen noita
Rikkoja. Miksi meillä on tommoset?
Halta näyttää. Ja kun keksin näitä lisärajoitteja vielä, ei auta yhtään asiaa. Jos me taas 5 vuotta kerran inspiraatiota siinä. Ei sille.
Eli nyt piti ensimmäiset tuli nyt mieleen, elikkä... Eikö vaan?
Joo. The fuel system in this car is one where the pressure regulator is at tank and the fuel rail has fixed fuel pressure. We will try to make that work as is, so we need to plug up the end of the fuel rail. And we of course need fuel pressure sensor to be able to monitor that the system works correctly. On the RM Primus we could even do closed loop control for the fuel pressure if that's needed. These injectors are old and rusty 630cc Degas that have been in use on my and Petri's E30s. They should be big enough for the power goal, and we have tested these to be still in within 2% with each other.
Nää on nyt eka tässä hyppysissä. Ota nyt varmat.
Sorry, couple of small things before the intake actually goes in. Flex fuel sensor goes on the side of the block to the fuel line, and we need to make bracket for that and install it.
Se on pitemmä.
And one more thing, which is the oil pressure and temp sensor. There isn't good ready spot for that, so I decided to make one on the punch-hole bolt.
Ne varmaan jotenkin muutenkin.
No, saa varmaan. Lähinnä pointti, että jos ne on helppo pistää siihen, niin laittaa, että jos pitää tätä väkertämään, niin elää laita.
Voi perkele.
No.
Tästä tuli muuten 5 pyttynen. Ei mitään.
Ei mitään. No, hyvä.
Haluatko ottaa tästä pikku smyykin?
Hienosti portannut tämän kannan. Ensimmäisenä tuosta. Pistääkö paikalle? Pistää sun irrotuksen kannan tänne. Ei kyllä. Noniin. Sitten nipparilla ne kaikki eestä pois ja syli. Minä voin pitää niillä laitella. Mutta siis pitää se nostaa tästä pois. Sillä tässä näkisi sen kohan, missä se on.
Niin ei se tarvi kuin 1 piste tiukalle. Niin. Jesus Christ. Ei oo takkuuna mennäkin lähteä.
Mä teit semmosen, että sitä voi asentaa paikallaan.
Se on mahdollista.
Marit siihen valloon kiinni sitten.
Tää ei oo vielä kohdalla.
No niin, hyvä. It starts to be ready for us to start checking basic settings for the Primus ECU, and then test that everything works, and then try starting after that. But let's put on the crank angle sensor first, which is the Sherry Hull sensor in this case. Kun katsoo orkkisanturista mallia, kuinka syvää tämä on, että saisi about eka kohin.
Niin on sekin.
Okay, here's how the RM Tuner software looks like. This is completely own one that isn't based on anything existing software. So it has a bit of learning curve. But at least I did learn this pretty quickly. But my VUP signals is to work, so let's connect to the ECU first, and then look at the settings. My tuning laptop is just so old junk that it's really struggling with the screen recording on. But I think we'll get through this. The ECU has M54 tune in it, so basic settings should be there already. And that looks to be the case. So I first want to see that the drive-by-wire pedal and the throttle body work. And this is wrong place for that. I need to go to the drive-by-wire section. And here we have the pedal calibration. I will click the released when I'm not touching the pedal. And then I will press down the pedal and click full pressed. And it starts working nicely. I also got the throttle body calibrated, and I took the CAN bus fuel pump in use also, and also the correct CAN bus protocol for this car. But my main camera failed to record all that, and also there was a lot of problems with the string recording and so on. So I have nothing about those. So let's look at those more closely on the next video. But we got into base where we have fuel pressure on the fuel rail, but of course the modification we did leak it, and there wasn't time to fix that on this visit. So I decided to try at least bring up the oil pressure in the engine. That of course requires a bit of tinkering, because these cars have the convenient starting feature, which is the thing that you only need to shortly press the start button and the car starts it by itself. But it requires few signals from ECU to work, and I have no interest on getting all that to work. So let's code out that feature. First of all, I disabled all these things that can prevent the car from cranking. Especially the one that requires clutch to be pressed for the car to start. It's especially bad feature to have with the extra stiff clutch. It will just eat up the radial bearings in the engine if you not start with the clutch being pressed. And then I also disabled this comfort starting. When it's disabled, the starter only runs when the start button is pressed. So no feedback needed from ECU. So now we can try if we can get the oil pressure up. Okay, and that's how it's now. It's basically this close to being started for the first time, but unfortunately we have small problems, like the starter doesn't work, or well, it works just a little bit, and then other small things that would be good to be done before first start. Also we failed to weld that fuel rail and it seems to be leaking, so that needs to be fixed. Unfortunately we need to stop this video here and continue in the next one. Hopefully then we can get this started. Petri will make the downpipe and the exhaust. And then we can start looking at the suspension, because this engine compartment starts to be ready. This might look a bit messy, but we haven't finalized anything yet. We will put all the covers on, tidy up these hoses and so on. But there's no point of putting anything on and to the final resting place before we have checked that everything works, all the fluids stay in and so on. We will make this look nice when everything is tested here. But yeah, let's continue on the next video.
Älä kaivon nokkaasi. Älä perkele kuvaa nyt tätä hommaa. Anna minä vähän opetella.
Firman parhaan alumiinipalasia alustaksi ottamaan.
Ei oo. Ei mittä haise.
Pikku hajuuri.
Olisiko se valmis nyt?
Se on valmis.
Katoppa mitä se. Mä sontasit rätkäs täällä omalla tyylillä. Ota alkku.
Jotakin muuta. Huomini poika.
Se on vähän liian kovaa kamaa. Ota toinen.
Joo.